Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Vihari.
Hare Krishna. I'd like to welcome all the guests today for this discussion on Srila Prabhupada's books as the basis, its advantage in our personal lives, and how it would help the ISKCON as an institution if everybody was reading Srila Prabhupada's books regularly. It gives me great pleasure, and it's an honor for the ministry to invite today as a guest a very senior devotee who is a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, a GBC member, an initiating spiritual master, and above and all, a personality who's been associated with Srila Prabhupada's books and educating devotees regularly on the intricate aspects of the Bhaktivedanta purports. I welcome His Holiness Romapada Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. Very generous introduction. Hare Krishna.
Maharaj, I offer you my humble obeisances. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavnebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. I also like to invoke auspiciousness by chanting the pranam mantras for Srila Prabhupada and the deities here in Sridham Mayapur, that we may be able to hear the nectar from your lips. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tina Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Maharaj, when was the first time that you came in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books?
The first time I came in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books was through Burijan Prabhu. Oh, Burijan Prabhu. Burijan Prabhu and I went to the same university where there was actually many other devotees, but he was the first devotee that I met. And I remember very, very clearly. We were in the basement of the Student Union building, and we're sitting together with some other friends at a lunch table, and he gave me a Back to Godhead magazine. I didn't know what Hare Krishna movement was. I didn't know what Back to Godhead magazine was. I didn't know anything. And he just smiled and said, when you get a chance, read it.
Which year, which location was it, Maharaj?
State University of New York at Buffalo, the Rathskeller in the basement of Norton Union, 1969.
Wow. That's 52 years.
Yeah.
53 years ago, Maharaj. And obviously, Burijan Prabhu was already associated with the movement in some form and shape.
Yes, he was. And I didn't know that he was. I didn't know anything. He gave me a magazine. Let me tell you the rest.
It was one of those clandestine slip through kind of a operation.
I don't know what his thought process was, but I know how it impacted my life. Let me tell you the story, since you're here to hear some stories. So I carried it around because I liked Burijan. I didn't know it was in the magazine. I just put it on my clipboard along with my other books. And one day, another student saw that magazine and he pointed to the magazine and he said, "Oh, no, you're not into that, are you?" And I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know what he was referring to, but it got my curiosity going. So I started reading it. And it was the original Back to Godhead magazines were just mimeographed and stapled together sheets of paper. And the main article in that particular issue was a part of an article by Bhaktisiddhanta called "The Bhagavad Its Ontology and Morphology." And, I had to get a dictionary just to understand the title of the article. And then I sat down to read the article, and I did what college kids often do. I had a red pen and underlined things and looked up words and put the meaning of the words in the margin. And 3 hours later, I completed the article. And I can't say I really understood everything, but what my experience was that I was in a place of consciousness that I'd never experienced before, just by contacting Bhaktisiddhanta. And from that day until today, I had started with the very highest regard for Bhaktisiddhanta. I didn't know Prabhupada, but I knew something, what the experience was contacting Bhakti. And it was because it was technical and elevated, because, as I was a pre-med student, I was used to technical things. That wasn't like impressive. It was the spiritual contact. And I felt it. So from there, then I got Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. And how I got Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita was another journey. The journey was...
So from that first article that you read...
That started everything.
It was intense. It was quite intense to be able to... in today's time and age, if you ask somebody to take an article and put in 3 hours, they wouldn't do it. Most people won't do it. But if I may ask, Maharaj, besides your curiosity being piqued by that comment by your friend, and anybody who's scientifically oriented would have the same experience, but did you, prior to that, have any experience with the studies of consciousness, yoga, Oriental philosophy? Why would you, what was the background which encouraged you beyond just that comment from the friend?
Well, I was, that period of time in America was the counterculture time. And counterculture time meant people were searching for alternatives, and I was a product of my time, searching. I wasn't like, obsessive about it, but it was, there was a thing going on in me that said 3 things. There's a higher reality. I know that I don't know what it is, and I want to know what it is. Those 3 things.
A very big ask. They don't know what it is, and I want to know what it is. Oh, amazing, Maharaj. You really wanted to find out. Yeah. And Maharaj, from the first, that very first reading, a lot of us really have a very faint memory of what we first read. But was this something that really touched your heart in what was written in the first article that you read?
Well, what touched my heart, I already shared. The words elevated me to a place of consciousness that I had never experienced before. Now, I do remember, the impression-wise, that the words were of the absolute truth as a person. Now, I don't know what exact words were in Bhaktisiddhanta's article. I don't remember. But, that the Bhagavat means the person.
Yes. And
the highest truth is a person. That's what I remember. But the way it was expressed wasn't, was unique and compelling.
Maharaj, you mentioned that thereon, at some point in time, you got in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books. You were encouraged to get the Gita, or you got the Gita. Could you share with us how that transpired?
Sure. Oh, it's a nice story. You'll like it. I had a philosophy professor, remember his name, George Boger was his name, and we had developed a friendship outside of class. So outside of class, we would get together and we would, he would read me some of his poetry. And sometimes we would go together to the pottery room, and together we would make pottery, because he was describing how it helped him get centered by centering the pot on the potter's wheel. And, he was a philosopher that lived his philosophy. And in the course of time, through our relationship, he gave me a copy of Bhagavad Gita. It wasn't Prabhupada's. And so here we go again. I started carrying it around with me along with my clipboard and my books. And another friend said, "Hey, I got one of those, but it's a different version. And so let me give it to you." So now I had 2 Bhagavad Gitas. And I thought, wait a minute. If there's 2, there's probably more. So I went to the library and I found there were 3 other translations of Bhagavad Gita. So I checked out all 3. I read all 5. And I came to 2 conclusions. One, it's not a book of poetry, because I thought, my friend is going to give me a book of poetry. It's not a book of poetry. And the other conclusion was, I don't understand it. Really simple. And some time passed. And I met some other devotees. I could name the names, but, they gave me a copy of Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, the abridged Macmillan Bhagavad Gita. And I started reading it, version number 6. And it was really easy to understand. I was puzzled. Why is this easy to understand? The others I couldn't understand at all. But I kept reading because it was, nice to understand. And then by continuing to read, it occurred to me, or it became to my realization, that Prabhupada was speaking from realization, not from scholarship. It wasn't a scholarly work. It was giving his realization, or that, I didn't understand at that time, but the disciplic succession's message of what Bhagavad Gita is. And it was easy to understand. So I kept reading it. That's how it started, through a philosophy professor.
Maharaj, how long did you continue to read the Bhagavad Gita by yourself before you were inspired? And how did you get inspired to then pursue that relationship with devotees and come in contact with them?
How did it happen, or how long did it happen? Which is the question.
Yes, how long did you continue to read it just by yourself?
Well, it took about, like 9 months. It was like a whole school year, because I had schoolwork, so I couldn't just do that. But little by little, doors started opening that I didn't even know there was a door there, because, something was stirring inside. In retrospect, I can describe it, but when it was going on, it was just, Alice in Wonderland. The doors were opening, and I walked through the doors and found something wonderful inside. And, a devotee named Narothamananda gave me a bead bag. And we went together for japa walks. And, he was a nice devotee, a very soft, kind person. And slowly. And then there was a club on campus. And, frankly, I went because I had nice prasadam. I was already a vegetarian, and it was nice. So, I went to attend. This was a time at that particular university. It was a time when many devotees, maybe 30 devotees, had become devotees through that particular club at that university. And
that's a major success. That's a major success.
Oh, it was a very dynamic time. If you want to hear the story, I can tell you. There was during the anti-war protests, there was a situation where the Students for a Democratic Society, called SDS, had forcibly taken over the president's building, the administrative building on campus, and they're occupying the building. And they negotiated a number of things to help bring a peaceful solution. One of those things was what was called alternative college, where persons could come forward that didn't have PhDs and teach credited courses. And Rupanuga Prabhu taught a course in Bhagavad Gita. I wasn't one of those students, but I was a student when that was going on. I didn't know about the course at that time. And, you know, something like 15 people, 20 people became devotees from that course. Names like Prahladananda Swami, Gunagrahi Goswami, Lakshmi Moni and Jagadish, and, you know, a whole Trivikram Swami, and, you know, Tejas Prabhu and his wife, I don't know her name, and, you know, a whole cast, Bhagavan and his wife. They all became devotees through that club, or not club, through that university course. And then a center was set up across from campus. And, you know, I used to visit the center across from the campus. We used to go to the program at the university. And slowly, the wheels were turning. And, you know, I was in a somewhat rebellious mood. I wasn't like ready to just, you know, become a Hare Krishna devotee. I was ready to be a devotee, but not, you know, part of an organized religion devotee. I was just going to be, you know, who I was. That was, you know, then some things happened.
Maharaj, it seems that within the context of an external revolution in the university, there was a major internal revolution of consciousness that was created there.
Yes.
And when I reflect on what you say, you bring out such important points that although some of us, we read, and some devotees today also say, oh, it's a bit difficult, it gets a little bit boring to read. But like you describe, if we continue the pursuit, make the pursuit, doors open up, and retrospectively, we'll be able to see what it does to our consciousness. It's amazing. Maharaj, you mentioned that you weren't prepared to join an institution or an organization.
No.
But then you did. And you're part of this organization for so many years.
Yes.
Something must have happened to make that change.
Something happened.
What was that?
Well, there were a few somethings, but one of the major somethings was a kind of experience. You know, in retrospect, I feel this experience had the effect of catapulting me through multiple lifetimes, fast forward into the life of devotion. Here's what happened. By Krishna's arrangement, in my senior year of college, I was living off campus at a farmhouse where I could get in my car and drive to school to take my classes and come back. So one weekend, I went for a japa walk, along with the 16 other things that I was doing for spiritual practice. Japa was one of them. And because I was still, you know, options open. And so we went for a japa walk, went out through the back. There was a cornfield in the back, and went around the cornfield and out the backside, all the way to the backside of the cornfield. There was a line of trees, and through the line of trees, there was a creek. On the other side of the creek, there's more trees. And I just kept walking. I was in another realm through just absorption and chanting. And I got to a place where there was a clearing on the other side of the tree line. And then I looked out over the horizon, and there was the skyline of the city. And all of a sudden, there was this experience that helped me understand that I had just been, Prabhupada's mercy had come into my life by his going out of his way to find me and others who he didn't even know to give, this opportunity to connect with reality. And it was like, boom, 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 boom. And I felt this intense, profound gratitude that Prabhupada had changed my life. And as I turned around and walked back towards the farmhouse, towards the place where we stayed. And this realization was growing, saying, I have to give back. I can't just receive the sacrifice that Prabhupada gave and just keep it. I have to give back. And then the thought went, uh-oh, that means I have to surrender. But I have to give back. And I have to help Prabhupada do what Prabhupada did for me. And the way to do that was through his temples, because he created temples for that purpose. So I decided, and that walk back to the farmhouse, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I need to give my life to Prabhupada's work. You know how it's going to look, I don't know. But I can't just take and not give back. So that was the event. Transform my look in retrospect. Lifetimes I went past through, just in a walk, and mercy coming. So how it ended up at a temple, that's another story. I don't know if you want to talk about reading Prabhupada's books, but the other story was a visit to Boston.
Yes.
Where I was looking for, entrance into applications to medical school, because Boston has lots of colleges. And when I was there, the place where I stayed, it was some students that were friends. And on the windowsill where I was staying was a little set of Jagannath deities. The little tiny, tiny ones.
Yes.
I knew who they were, because there were Jagannath deities at that little preaching center at the university. So I went to the Boston Temple. I hadn't planned to go to the Boston Temple, but I went to the Boston Temple, and it was a very special evening. I mean, doors were opening that I didn't even know were there. So Brahmananda was visiting after having spent some time, a month or something like that, with Prabhupada. And the kirtan was just like out of sight. And then big body Brahmananda sat behind this little tiny lectern. It was like 1/15 the size of his body, smiling and beaming and radiating and telling Prabhupada stories. And I thought, wow, this is great. So that's the temple that I joined, because, the atmosphere was what it was. And so, when I finished graduation, I got in my little Volkswagen and drove straight all the way to Boston and moved into the temple. And my contemplation was, let me try it out. I'm not, who knows what's going to happen. That was my mood, for quite some time. I don't know. There's lots of doors, and I don't know what's behind them, but I'm going to try it out, and let's see what happens.
So the thought that you had while you were walking, that you want to reciprocate Srila Prabhupada's gesture, sort of culminated on that evening in opening up another door, and you joined.
Yeah.
Maharaj,
Yeah.
when you joined the center in Boston, in those years, what was the culture of reading Srila Prabhupada's books amongst the devotees?
3 times a day classes. When during that summer was when Nectar Devotion was published. So we had morning class, evening class, and then we had a third class when Nectar Devotion was published. Prabhupada wanted us to read it every day, so we did. Satsvarup Maharaj, then Dasadikari, was the president, and he followed whatever Prabhupada said. And Prabhupada said, so we did. And the culture was, there wasn't, we were busy. with Sankirtan and everything else that we do. So it wasn't so much reading outside of class, but it was attending class 3 times daily. Everyone.
And that's quite a bit of a commitment for
an
active devotee in those years, because life was very busy, as we are told.
Yes, very busy, very dynamic. But everyone attended. And we looked forward to it. It wasn't like, oh, I got to go to class. It was intimate. It was a wooden building, single family residential building that had several floors. And we were packed in. And so it was like a big family in a single family residence. I mean, at that time, ISKCON Press, there was no BBT, was there. And that's one of the reasons, that was one of the attractive features. And they lived on one part of the building. So there were, Bhardraj and Murlidhar and Jadharani and the artists. And then Jayadvaita Maharaj and, Giriraj Maharaj was the one that trained me up in Krishna consciousness when I first joined. Then he got, sent to India and got involved in Bombay. But, that was very dynamic. Hridayananda Maharaj was there to work with ISKCON Press. And it was really a cast of stars very intimate in a small house.
Maharaj, from the little that exposure that we have to ISKCON and its history, it seems like Srila Prabhupada and Krishna had sort of handpicked very scholarly devotees in your life. I mean, starting from Bhurijan Prabhu and Satswarup Maharaj and all of these devotees. It just is a proof of how much the Lord reciprocates in terms of our desires to surround us with devotees who would help us out in Krishna consciousness.
Well, what I see a little different is Prabhupada was like a magnet, and the iron filings were just drawn to the magnet. And Krishna sent to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada had many such persons at that time, all over the country, all over the world, because I don't know all over the world, but I've traveled around the country a lot. And they were like amazing persons that Krishna, or they were sent to Prabhupada. I'll tell you a little, it's just, it's not on reading Prabhupada's books, but in that farmhouse where I was staying, there was a young couple. They weren't married. How young people live together. They were living together, boyfriend, girlfriend living together. And Prabhupada sent them along with another devotee couple to go to Atlanta and to start a center in Atlanta. And then when they got to Atlanta, they stayed in an apartment where William Ogle, who later became Balabantu, became the temple president, GBC, and a great devotee. I mean, here was 2 people that they weren't married. They were chanting, but they weren't married, and they went to go start a Hare Krishna temple in Atlanta with another devotee and his wife. So it's like Prabhupada, Krishna sent talented people to give Prabhupada the resource to spread the Hare Krishna movement. And he spread the Hare Krishna movement because of what was in his heart, to give in an unprecedented way, give the answer to life's problems to people, which you read Prabhupada's books and that's what you find out. What's the end? What is the real problems of life and how to solve them? It's there.
Very important perspective you shared, Maharaj. And it also shows us that how a disciple almost always passes the credit to the spiritual master. And definitely we are able to benefit. And everything that you're sharing with us, Maharaj, also not only in the context of reading Srila Prabhupada's books, but is also a good example for us as to how we should see things in the right perspective. Maharaj, you mentioned that there were 3 classes happening every day, and devotees were leading a very dynamic life. you also mentioned that there were some instructions that were received by from Srila Prabhupada about reading Nectar of Devotion. In the 70s, the remaining 70s, how did it evolve further? Did you get more busy to not have time to read, or this culture of hearing Srila Prabhupada's books, reading,
it continued? Two things. One is Nectar Devotion was elevated subject matter. And so we were told, I didn't see the letter, but we were told that Prabhupada said that if you don't understand Nectar Devotion, read it again. And after reading it again, if you don't understand it, read it again. And read it again and again, and eventually you'll understand it. That was the instruction. And we were very simple. Okay, we'll just read it again and again. And then eventually, didn't say how long, but eventually you'll understand. So we just followed. We had full faith, and he said, so we followed. Now, as a detail, I was in Boston for one summer. And while I was there for that summer, because, school was over, and so I was there for the summer. And there was Prabhupada wanted Boston to have a printing press, because that's where ISKCON Press was. And they tried out one person to run the press. He didn't know what he was doing. And so there was a devotee in New York that knew how to run a printing press. So he came to Boston and I went to New York. I was a trade. That was how things happened in those days. So there I was, a little kid in New York City. And, there were 3 classes in New York. There were 3 classes.
Wow.
No, well, there were 3 classes because after some time, ISKCON Press shifted from Boston to New York, and they had a class midday. So, we joined their midday class in the, in another part of the building. And so there were 3 classes a day.
Maharaj, you had very dynamic lifestyle, very busy schedule. Could you still find some time to read Srila Prabhupada's books?
Well, I'll be honest, and most of for some period of time as a young, engaged in Sankirtan brahmachari, most of my activity was distributing books, and I was in the category of one distributed books and didn't read as much as I was involved in distributing books. But there was always attraction for reading and studying and understanding deeply and discussing. But there was a stretch of time where I wasn't reading like I would have wanted to, because of the missionary spirit. Now, it's not what Prabhupada instructed, but that's what was going on. And so I was reading less than I would have, should have, could have.
Maharaj, you in terms of what Prabhupada instructed, could you share something with us? I mean, we would like to hear straight from the horse's mouth, in the context of that 70s. What did Prabhupada instruct with reference to his books?
Well, but I can repeat what you know, and that is that strong emphasis on distributing his books, and a less emphasis, but an emphasis on I wrote these books for my disciples, and so you must read the books, and and other things about encouraging how to help people become enthused, read the book. If you read the book, then you'll be inspired to share its contents with people and explain it to people where you're enthused, and people will be interested just by your enthusiasm and what's within it. So that was one of the, both in terms of japa and in terms of the contents of the books, the inspiration for me was so that I could be a better instrument, I needed to have good japa. I needed to have spiritual strength, and I needed to know what was within Prabhupada's books in order to inspire others to receive them. Understanding that in many cases, they may receive it just by the inspiration. This is wonderful. And then later their life gets distracted. But, that wasn't so much, it was get the books in their hand, give them the opportunity, as the opportunity had been given to me or to us.
Yes, Maharaj. Maharaj, I'd like to shift gears into the managerial realm of ISKCON and ask you, what would you like to say to managers who say that they don't have enough time to read Prabhupada's books because there is so much service to perform? And what has your observation been over the last 50 years in case if Srila Prabhupada's books reading is neglected?
Okay. The first part of the question is to say there isn't time is, I call it a rubber crutch. It's really
sorry
about,
that I didn't catch that, Maharaj.
I call it a rubber crutch.
Rubber crutch. I got it.
You lean on the rubber crutch and it doesn't hold your weight. It bends because it's a rubber crutch. It's not a solid one. Nothing solid about that one. That's time management. And such a person needs proper encouragement and, someone who they're accountable to, that holds them to their spiritual development, not just getting tasks accomplished. Prabhupada was very demanding of capable people. He wanted them to do the service in practical ways, get practical results by practical activity. And he also wanted those very same people that were very busy and had capabilities of doing multiple things to be spiritually strong, because he wanted his movement to be successful. And it's not just by getting things done, but it's by spiritual cultivation, spiritual strength, spiritual purity. So, yes, I haven't so much observed. I mean, I know there's been surveys done, how much reading do our leaders, administrators do? And, it's inadequate. It's very clear. The surveys show it's inadequate. However, the persons who I, in administrative capacity, have worked with, they're inclined to study and they're inclined to speak, because you can't speak if you haven't studied. So again, the reading of a leader may have been more inspired by, I have to speak because I'm a leader, and therefore I better read because I can't be an airhead when I speak. So it may be just by, to do my service where it's, acceptable or inspiring, that I have to read. But, it's inadequate. And what happens when it remains inadequate for some time is the person isn't strong, and the consequence is the following is not strong, or the dissension is greater, and they end up more time with firefighting because of unqualified people who they're leading, because they're not reading Prabhupada's books and not chanting carefully. So there's definitely a parallel or connection between spiritual strength and having a community that's functioning well together. And that when you function well together, you can accomplish tasks better. And the converse is also true. So it's been an observation. That's what you're asking for. Where there is spiritual strength in the leader, spiritual strength, not just managerial capacity and acumen, but spiritual strength, then over time, things become stronger and stronger and stronger. And the opposite is also the opposite, becomes more and more problematic.
The converse situation is something that none of the managers would like to be, unless you want to commit suicide, because while firefighting, every fireman at some point in time sometimes succumbs to the fire. And that's what happens, I think, in the case of managers as well. Maharaj, in terms of a culture, especially in the managerial positions, what would your suggestion, recommendation would be for managers or ISKCON as a society? What should we do to...
It's time management. It's time management. You know, leaders need to be helped or trained or, given a schedule or whatever it takes so that some block of time is for each of the things that are important. That's what time management is. I mean, you've had a corporate position. You can't do corporate stuff if you can't manage your time well. So our ISKCON leaders need time management and, blocks. I call it blocks of time, and so much for this and so much for that. And it's just every day. You don't not brush your teeth. You don't not take a bath. You don't not eat. So there are things that we do because we do. So it's just part of our structured time management, and best for managers or anybody, non-managers as well, is early in the morning. And so how do you do the early in the morning? It's really simple. You take rest early.
Yes.
And, good managers have learned to do that. Now, it's a little difficult. It's a little difficult when you're doing some preaching that takes place in the evening to get up early. And so how to do both, preaching that doesn't keep you up late at night, unless you just learn to sleep less or something like that. So, but that's a problem. But for managers, it's not so much preaching late at night. It's a matter of, knowing when to turn the lights out at night and then getting up early. And good managers that do time management well know how to do that, so they can get up early, chant early, and read early. And before the day begins, your battery is charged. Your Krishna consciousness is in good shape, good focus. And chant prayerfully and read prayerfully, and you're filled. And then you can do the other service, whatever it is. Now, some services don't permit it, like deity worship. It's early in the morning. You can't tell the deity, I got to do my sadhana, so I'll come back to you later. But so some services, kitchen, but management doesn't require the early. If you get up early, even there's things that need to be attended to, you've already have substantial. So there's always exception, but it's a principle. You're asking, what's advice for managers? Time management, get to bed early, rise early, and do your devotional things early. Now, some people like to have some time in the afternoon or evening or whatever, and that's fine. But make sure it's there in the morning, because there's always something that comes up. So make sure and if you get off, this is a time management rule or principle, you go to plan B, and the very next day you're back at plan A. Very next day. And if just that's your mood of service, you're at plan A. And it's the regulated time management plan A. And then you do it every day and every day and every day and every day. And over a period of time and years and months and years, then you've made some spiritual progress, not just gotten things done.
Very practical advice, Maharaj. Thank you. And previously you also mentioned that this in the context of individual discipline initiative. And you also previously mentioned the word, there should be encouragement from others. Let's say institutionally, there should be encouragement for managers to do the same. Maharaj, I wanted to, you touched upon this point about late night preaching and devotees having activities late in the evenings. I like to ask you, in the context of householders now, we have a movement in which large percentage of our members are working devotees. They have families, they have jobs. How do they fit in the as part of this sadhana, how do they fit in reading of Srila Prabhupada's books? Because almost always they're overwhelmed.
Well, it's the same principle. The manager's overwhelmed, and the householder got his job and his family and household duties is overwhelmed. Welcome to the club. The principle doesn't change.
Yes.
The principle is time management. And time management means blocks of time, and the block of time that doesn't get moved around, unless it's an emergency, it doesn't get moved around. It's in the morning, and you do something that's in the morning, and some people do something at night before they rest, and just make sure the light goes out at the right time, and then you've got a regulated schedule, and don't let the light stay on. You just take rest, and if you follow that discipline as a householder or a manager or anybody, you'll have a regulated life, and you'll have strength and purity and clarity. It becomes your lifestyle. It's a choice that everyone can make or not make, but that's my recommendation.
The principle still holds. It's the same principles applied in different contexts.
Yes.
Maharaj, in terms of as an inspiration and encouragement for all of us, I may ask this question. I'm sorry. Maharaj, what is your schedule like, and how much time in your such a dynamic service are you able to give time to reading Srila Prabhupada's books, and how does it look at your end so that others can take inspiration as well?
Well, my life as a sannyasi is not so much to be compared to other people whose life is not that of a sannyasi. But you're asking the question. So there's plan A and plan B.
Yes.
And I have grown to request or schedule evening gatherings where it's a little tight for householders, but I'd like to end at around 8 o'clock, 8:15, because often it means getting in a car and going back. And, lights out for me, lights out by 9:15-ish, 9:15-ish. And then, get up early and chant early. And, my reading, along with, other things that I do, it's commonly a few hours a day. Often it's, for me, reading means preparing for a seminar, preparing for discussing a topic. That helps keep me on track. And, then there's always not just the subject that I'm preparing, but researching this and referencing that and so forth and so on. So I would say between 3 to 4 hours a day is average for me for reading Prabhupada's books and our Vaishnava literature in general. Aside from the morning and evening class, and in addition to the morning and evening class, and for me, it's almost every morning, every evening.
Wow.
Just like before this interview, I was speaking for an hour to an assembly on Zoom on lives of Jayadev Goswami and Gopal Bhatta Goswami, who we just observed their appearance and then the disappearance of Jayadev over here. So, and some time to spend on meditating on and remembering and reading something about their lives and diving into the topics.
Maharaj, we all have benefited greatly from the seminars that you give, and if not for everybody, at least for sannyasis and those householders who probably have taken retirement, etc. I think this is a good standard for us to aspire for, which is to give more time to our sadhana, have a plan A for reading Srila Prabhupada's books, and strengthen ourselves internally besides just doing our managerial service or other services we may have as a householder, etc. Maharaj, I also want to take one more question with you, which is we hear the phrases, and this is something very important for our society. Srila Prabhupada as a founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada as a preeminent Siksha Guru. Could you please give us a context, in the context of the Bhaktivedanta purports and Srila Prabhupada's books, and how do these words, which are very important titles, how do they relate and connect with the Bhaktivedanta purports and its importance in our lives?
Well, I like keeping things simple.
Yes,
It's easier for me to keep things simple. We can go off to a very long, elaborate description, but keeping things simple. Prabhupada, in my words, Prabhupada is pablamized. Pablamized means like baby food, baby pablum. Is you take an apple and you make it into baby pablum, and you can eat baby pablum apple, and you get all the nourishment that's there from the apple, but even a baby can digest it. So Prabhupada has pablamized the writings of our predecessor acharyas, the very elevated teachings of everyone, the previous acharyas and the Goswamis and Vishwanath and Baladev and Bhakti Vinod and Bhakti Siddhanta. And sometimes he directly quotes them, but in many cases, having become sufficiently familiar with both their writings and Prabhupada's, practically you can take every sentence in his writings and it's extracting the essence from something that one of our acharyas has written, and he's pablamized it. So the essence is there. And if you read Prabhupada's books, everything is there. And I don't know if you've interviewed Keshav Bharati Maharaj, but if you haven't, please do, because he's, one of his recent quotes to me is, I've edited this and that and the other thing, some 20 books, and now I only want to read Prabhupada's books because everything is there. Everything is there. So now I appreciate reading the writings of other acharyas because it gives details and it helps me in my faith in Prabhupada, that everything that he wrote came from one of these great personalities. When you wiggle this over here and it wiggles something over there, and you wiggle something over here and it wiggles something over there. He's just taken all those connections and made it very, very simple. And our faith in him as our founder acharya is so important for not just his disciples, but for ISKCON. And it doesn't mean that one shouldn't read or cannot read eventually the predecessor acharyas in their writings. For example, I'm now reading Brihad Bhagavatamrita but Prabhupada writes in Chaitanya Charitamrita,
yes,
the one who is interested in the soul, devotional service, and Krishna must read Brihad Bhagavatamrita by Sanatana Goswami. And so that's pretty strong. And you read it and wow, it's really elevated literature. Really elevated literature. And so one can just get attracted to really elevated literature and not have the grounding and foundation that comes from reading Prabhupada's books. So one helps the other. It doesn't diminish my faith. At this stage in my devotional life, it doesn't diminish my faith to read other things. And they say, oh, but that's really up there. It's up there in Prabhupada's writings. And he's prepared us. He's helped to qualify us to not be puzzled when we read something that's so elevated. We have the foundation.
Yes, Maharaj. And Maharaj, actually, you also touched upon a question that we are asked many times, and I'll probably just paraphrase that question now, which is, now there are so many books.
Too many.
Yes, in the temple, which book to read. Sometimes, Maharaj, we've also heard questions such as, some devotees are being told that you should wait till you read Prabhupada's books. You should read other books first. And I think, Maharaj, what do we do? What do we say to devotees in that context when, if somebody turns around and says, hey, you should read XYZ books before you can touch Srila Prabhupada's books? What would your perspective be on that?
I don't know. I don't hear that one. So I don't know what the XYZ ones are. There's somebody.
They say read the specific spiritual masters books first, and then come to Srila Prabhupada's books.
That's silly. That's silly. That's totally silly. I thought you were talking about, the smaller collection of the Prabhupada's BBT publications that aren't Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and Chaitanya Charitamrita. I was going to share that someone that's been around for, I don't know, some number of years, have a new person they're helping, and they're reading, one of those ABC books, whatever it is. I forget what it is, Journey of Self-Discovery or something like that. And they're finding, wow, that there's a lot here, and it's really helping my spiritual life. So it's not necessary that you can quote me. It's not necessary to read our current spiritual masters' books in order to have access to Prabhupada's books. That's absolutely silly. I mean, it's absolutely silly. Prabhupada didn't write books that had to have somebody else prepare somebody else to read his books. He was preaching to the world. He was speaking to the world that do nothing about nothing. And he knew who his audience was, and he knew how to reach his audience. And somebody to say he didn't, that's offensive. He knew his audience. And someone may say, well, that was, 20 years ago, and now it's today. Sorry, Prabhupada knew his audience. He was preaching for the broad audience. It doesn't mean that other literatures don't have their place, but to say you can't access Prabhupada's books until, I'm sorry. No, there may be,
if you say something 3 times, it's sealed, and now it's clear. It's a silly concept. I will quote it, and I'll say it's a silly concept. If somebody
Prabhupada knew his audience. I would say Prabhupada knew his audience, and he didn't need somebody to introduce him to his audience. He knew his audience. He knew how to touch the hearts and the minds of his audience. There may be bridge literature that can help people that aren't ready to touch their nose, and they have to put their hand behind their head to touch their nose. But it's not, the direct, Prabhupada was very direct, and he knew his audience. And he was very effective.
Maharaj, I want to ask you one last question, which is, if this is like a legacy question, moving 100 years on, if somebody was to view this recording, Maharaj, you mentioned Srila Prabhupada knew 20, 40, 50 years ago his audience. We are asked, this question comes up, the books, will they still remain contextual, relevant for the audience 100 years, 200 years from now? I mean, only Krishna knows what the world is going to be 10,000 or 5,000 years from now. But what are your thoughts on this question, in response to this question?
Well, just like Baladev Vidyabhusan and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur were writing during a certain time.
Yes.
And their audience was a different audience. The principles didn't change. And then some time passed, and Bhaktivinoda and Bhaktisiddhanta, they had a different audience than Baladev Vidyabhusan and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. But the principles didn't change, and they spoke according to their audience and according to their personality. And so going into the future, there will be there currently and in the future there will be writings that must be in line with what's in Prabhupada's books. And they have the relevance because that's the lens through which we can get a clear understanding, somewhat of a clear understanding of the predecessor acharyas. And then you go to the predecessor acharyas and see, voila, the principles are the same. The language is different. But it's the lens through which we're going to have access to it's like Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's writings about the six Goswamis. It's a lens through which we can see the six Goswamis' writings and how it all the puzzle pieces fit together. It doesn't change over time. The language with which we speak to people about it may change, but the principles don't change. It'll be forever relevant for members of ISKCON, at least.
And on that note of remaining forever relevant, you have helped us today, Maharaj. You've given us a lens, a lot of inspiration, encouragement, right from the beginning of that one day when you got back to Godhead in your hand, all the way now. And you just described that when you're reading Brihad Bhagavatamrita and other books of the Goswamis, it's increasing your appreciation for Srila Prabhupada. And you quoted Keshav Bharati Maharaj also, saying that after editing, now I just want to read Srila Prabhupada's books. As many devotees have shared with us, honorable spiritual masters such as yourself, that we can make our lives successful. At least we should open our bookshelves, pick up Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and make it an attempt to read it before it's too late. Maharaj, I'm very, very thankful on behalf of the ministry that you gave us the time today to share your perspectives on Srila Prabhupada's books, your many realizations filled with inspiring anecdotes. Thank you so much, Maharaj, for this.
Thanks for the invitation and keep up the good work.
We'll keep trying, Maharaj. Thank you so much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and his transcendental
Look out your window. It's full morning sun out there.
It has arrived, yes. And I would say that while sun was coming outside, some brightness was coming in my heart just hearing from your holiness as well at the same time.
You're a poet. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Maharaj. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Okay.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.